Hey everyone, it's Aaron from NinjaOps. Whenever you're looking to build a VBA macro that will automate a process, you're never going to be able to find all the code in one place. Instead, you'll have to compile it piece by piece on your own. This video will go through the 5 simple fundamentals you will need that will enable you to start automating your processes in VBA. Fundamental number 1, knowing where your code is stored. VBA code are basically instructions telling Microsoft Excel what you want it to do. This code is stored in the VBA window, which can be found by hitting Alt F11. This brings up the VBA window. Code is stored in modules that can be created by right-clicking on the Microsoft Excel object, hitting Insert, Module. I'm going to write a very simple code that will instruct Excel to enter the number 1 in whichever cell I have selected. So what this macro does, it says whatever the active cell is, insert the number 1. So I'm going to go select a cell, and I'm going to go run my macro. I'm going to hit the play button. As you can see, number 1 is in my cell. Place it over here, run my macro, and there it is, number 1. And I can keep doing this and run this macro anywhere. Fundamental number 2, always save your workbooks as xlsm format, not xlsx, the standard format. If you try saving it as an xlsx with a macro recorded, you'll get a warning sign. Let's save this as sample 1. And this is the standard, not the xlsm. Let's try that. Say warning, all your VBA code will get lost if you save it in this format. So let's click no and save it in xlsm. This is a proper format to save it in, and our code that we've written out will be saved now. So now if we close it and reopen it, we hit Alt F11. We'll see our code is still there. Fundamental number 3, stepping through your code. As you put together a VBA macro, you're going to have a number of lines of code, each with instructions to do something new. Oftentimes you're going to run into error messages, or you may just forget what one line actually does. In order to see what each line does and to see if each line works, you can step through each line using the F8 key. So what this macro does, I added a couple of lines, populates the active cell with the number 1, moves down a cell, and populates the next cell with the number 2. If I just click run, it'll execute the code. As you can see, it ran the code. If I want to do it line by line, I select into the text area and I hit F8, which will highlight the name of the macro. F8 again, and as you can see, it's executed just the first line. It's going to execute the next line when I hit F8 again. It's moved down 1. And lastly, it'll populate this with number 2 as I hit F8 again, and then it's going to end the macro. Fundamental number 4, recording a macro. At this point, we know where our code is stored, what file format to save our workbooks in, and how to step through code to make sure it works. But how do you know what to write to begin with? Don't worry about that. Starting off, no one knows how to write VBA. The easiest way to learn how to write VBA is to manually go through the steps in Excel and have Excel record what you've done and translate it into VBA code. I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to have this simple macro, but I don't know how to write it. There's a button at the bottom of the screen that will record what I'm doing for me. If you don't see it, right-click on the bar down here and select it to make sure it's viewable. I'm going to click the button. I'm going to call this, just name the macro number 2. Hit OK. As you can see here, it created a new module that is going to start recording what I've done. I'm going to type in the number 1 here. I'm going to hit enter. And as you can see, Excel recorded what I did here and wrote out the code for me. I'm going to come back here, hit number 2, hit enter, and it again recorded what I did there. To stop recording, you select the button again, click it, and there you go. You've just written your first VBA macro. Fundamental number 5, Googling for code. Okay, at this point, I've recorded my first macro, and I have my code in my module. But let's say I want to add a feature to my macro that I'm not able to record. Let's say I want to add a message box at the end of the macro to tell me that my macro is complete. How do I figure that out? The old-fashioned way, Google. Let's go Google this. Add the code to the macro. Add message box, VBA. Let's see what we get. See our first result. And here we go. Here's some code. Just type in message box and then the message that I want. So I'm going to copy this. And then I'm going to add it to the end of my code. Line. But I don't want it to say this is fun. I want it to say macro complete. All right, let's go run it. Well, first let's clear our data, actually. Let's go run our macro. Run. And here we get our message box, macro complete. So there you have it. You now have all the tools necessary to start automating your processes using VBA macros.